patria o muerte.
Episode 4, The Hemispheric Gamble. 1. The Permission Structure. If the Arctic was about geometry, a cold, clean calculation of missile arcs and ice melt, then Latin America was about something far messier. It was about permission. Permission to act without consequence. Permission to redefine sovereignty not as a right, but as a revocable privilege. Permission to admit, finally, openly, without the polite euphemisms of the United Nations, that the age of restraint was dead. Because while Iceland exposed the logic of preemption, Venezuela revealed its terrifying scope. Until this moment, the return of empire could still be framed as regional anxiety. Apologists could argue that Russia was simply protecting its near abroad in Ukraine, reacting to NATO expansion like a cornered bear. They could argue that China was merely securing its maritime perimeter in the South China Sea, acting like any rising power would. Even the US moves in the Arctic could be spun as defensive posturing. Venezuela shattered that illusion. Venezuela was not near the United States in the way Ukraine is near Russia. It shared no border. It was not threatening Washington militarily, its tanks were rusting, its air force grounded by a lack of spare parts. It was not even ideologically hostile in any meaningful sense. Its socialism was a survival mechanism for a corrupt elite, not a crusade to convert the world. But it was useful. And in an imperial system, usefulness is destiny. To be useful is to be targeted. To be rich in what the empires need is to be cursed. 2. The black weapon. Venezuela oil is not merely petroleum trapped beneath the soil of the Orinoco Belt. It is something else entirely in the eyes of a strategist. It is stored future power. It is energy that can be converted into influence, leverage, industrial continuity, and military endurance. It is the blood of fleets and the breath of factories. In a decaying global order, resources are no longer commodities to be bought and sold on an open market. They are weapons. The old rules, the rules of the 1990s, the rules we convinced ourselves were permanent, said you trade for them. You sign a contract, you pay the market price, and the oil flows. The new rules say you deny them. This is the shift most people fail to grasp. They still look at the world through the lens of consumption. America needs oil to drive its cars. No. That is 20th century thinking. The United States was no longer trying to maximize its own access to oil. It has plenty of its own fracking wells in Texas and the Dakotas. It was trying to minimize everyone else's. In the windowless rooms of the Pentagon and the CIA, the calculus had shifted from acquisition to interdiction. If you control the tap, you don't just control the drink, you control the thirst of your enemies. China understood this perfectly. Which is why Beijing didn't send aircraft carriers to Latin America. It sent bankers. It sent engineers. It invested early, quietly, and deeply. Loans that could never be fully repaid. Infrastructure projects that bound local economies to Chinese supply chains. Energy contracts written in Mandarin and Spanish. Surveillance systems that tracked citizens for local autocrats while feeding data back to servers in Shenzhen. Ports that were commercial until the day they weren't. Russia understood it too, though more crudely. Moscow didn't have the cash for infrastructure, so it sent what it had, arms sales. Military advisors. Symbolic alliances. A way to signal reach without the heavy lift of real commitment. A Russian bomber landing in Caracas was not an invasion force, it was a middle finger raised toward the north. From Washington's perspective, this was intolerable. Not because Venezuela mattered as a nation. The suffering of its people, the collapse of its currency, the exodus of its refugees, these were tragic, but they were not strategic. It mattered because it was a precedent. 3. The ghost of Monroe. If China and Russia could establish durable resource footholds in the Western Hemisphere, if they could turn Venezuela into a forward operating base for their influence, then the Monroe Doctrine would be dead. The Monroe Doctrine, formulated in 1823, was the original declaration of American empire. The Western Hemisphere is closed to European colonization. For 2 centuries, it had been the invisible wall around the Americas. In the late 20th century, it was dismissed by academics as obsolete, a relic of a colonial age. But unenforced doctrines do not fade away. They invite challenge. US foreign policy had reached a crossroads it could no longer postpone. The gray zone was vanishing. Either Latin America remained a sphere of influence, a secure, unquestioned backyard for the United States, or it became contested terrain. There was no third option. This is where Trump's worldview becomes structurally relevant again. Forget the personality, the rallies, the erratic tweets. Look at the structure of his thought. It was not an anomaly, it was an expression of an underlying shift in American power. Trump did not believe in globalization as a rising tide that lifts all boats. He did not believe in the global community. He believed in zones. Zones of control. Zones of extraction. Zones of exclusion. And Latin America, in his cold calculus, was not foreign. It was proximate. It was historically conditioned to bow to Washington. It was economically entangled. It was militarily accessible. Above all, it was defensible. From this perspective, Venezuela was not an outlier. It was a stress test. Could the United States still act unilaterally in its own hemisphere? Could it still remove a regime without asking for permission from the UN Security Council? Could it still seize, or at least neutralize, strategic resources under the banner of national security? If the answer was no, then the American empire was already hollow. It was a giant with clay feet, waiting to be pushed over. 4. The calculus of survival. Geopolitical realism is a philosophy that strips the skin off the world to see the muscle underneath. It does not ask whether intervention is ethical. It does not ask about international law. It asks only one question: is non-intervention survivable? The logic unfolded in the White House Situation Room with brutal clarity. Premise 1. If China secures Venezuelan oil, it reduces its vulnerability to a U.S. maritime blockade in the Malacca Strait. It gains energy security, which makes it bolder in Taiwan. Premise 2. If Russia establishes a durable presence in the Caribbean, it gains asymmetrical leverage. It can threaten the U.S. homeland, forcing Washington to divert assets from Europe. Premise 3. If the United States hesitates, it signals decline. It tells every capital in the world that the hegemon is tired, that the backyard is open, that the fence is broken. In this equation, Venezuela's sovereignty is not a variable. It is collateral. This is the hemispheric gamble. Invade, or concede the hemisphere. Of course, the invasion would not look like D-Day. Trump's advisors framed it in softer language, the soothing corporate speak of the 21st century: stabilization, democratic transition, regional security partnership. But the underlying bet was stark. They were betting that Latin America would tolerate it. That the protests would burn out. That the local elites would prefer order to sovereignty. They were betting that Europe would object, issue stern letters, but do absolutely nothing. They were betting that China would protest, freeze some assets, but wait. That Beijing would not start World War III over a country 9,000 miles away. They were betting that Russia would posture, bluster, but avoid escalation. In short, they were betting that the costs would be manageable. And here is the truly unsettling part, the realization that chills the blood. They were probably right. 5. The silent partition. Latin America has endured intervention for centuries. Its political memory is scarred by coups, occupations, and economic strangulation. Resistance exists, it is fierce and proud, but fragmentation blunts it. Brazil rarely coordinates with Argentina. Mexico looks north, not south. The continent is a collection of islands on land. Europe, exhausted and dependent on U.S. security, no longer acts decisively outside its own borders. It is a spectator to history. China, still prioritizing its long-term accumulation of wealth, avoids premature confrontation in America's backyard. It plays Go, not poker. It is willing to lose a stone to win the board. Russia, overextended in Ukraine and Syria, prefers symbolic disruption to direct conflict. It wants to annoy the U.S., not fight it. So the gamble makes sense. Which is precisely why it is so dangerous. Because once one hemisphere is openly claimed, once the United States says, "This is mine, and I will do what I want here," the others follow. If the United States claims Latin America, if Russia claims Eastern Europe as its buffer, if China claims East Asia as its tributary, then the world has not entered a new Cold War. It has entered open partition. Resource wars are not fought everywhere at once. They do not begin with a global conflagration. They proceed by normalization. Each successful intervention lowers the threshold for the next. Each unpunished annexation rewrites the rulebook. Each silent concession teaches the empires what they can get away with. This is how the system accelerates. It learns. It adapts. It becomes hungrier. 6. The vertical axis. And acceleration produces blindness. While Washington, Moscow, and Beijing focus on dividing the world horizontally, carving the globe into hemispheres, regions, and buffer zones, another axis is being ignored. A vertical one. One that connects continents rather than separating them. One that follows the currents of the Atlantic rather than the latitudes of the map. Africa is watching this unfold with a clarity born of bitter experience. Its resources have always been extracted. Its borders have always been negotiable lines drawn by white men in distant rooms. What is new is the speed. What is new is the efficiency. Europe is watching with denial. It still believes law will save it. It clings to the belief that if it recites the rules loud enough, the wolves will go away. Latin America is watching with recognition. It has seen this movie before. It knows how it ends. What none of them yet fully grasp is that their fates are converging. The hemispheric gamble does not isolate them, it aligns them. It puts them in the same boat, facing the same storm. Because if the future belongs only to empires large enough to deter annexation, if sovereignty requires a nuclear arsenal and a continental economy, then medium powers, Brazil, Nigeria, Portugal, South Africa, Spain, must either fuse or vanish. 7. The architect in the South. This realization does not come first to generals or presidents. Generals are fighting the last war. Presidents are fighting the next election. It comes to diplomats, to historians, to those trained to see continuity rather than events. And somewhere in Brazil, far from the burning oil fields of Venezuela, far from the sterilized corridors of Washington, a woman is assembling a different kind of map. She is standing in a room in Brasilia, or perhaps Rio, looking out at the South Atlantic. She is not looking at the borders that divide Brazil from its neighbors. She is looking at the ocean that connects it to the world. She is building a map not of hemispheres, but of oceans. Not of domination, but of integration. She understands that the hemispheric gamble is also an opening. A crack in the imperial armor. When empires overreach horizontally, when they stretch themselves thin trying to hold onto vast territories, they leave vertical seams exposed. And those seams, Africa, Europe, Latin America, were once stitched together before. Not by conquest, but by navigation, law, and shared administration. By the caravels and the trade winds. By a ghost that the modern world thinks it has exorcised. The empires believe the future will be decided by who takes what. Who plants the flag on the oil well. Who puts the missile on the island. She believes it will be decided by who unifies first. The hemispheric gamble has been placed. The chips are on the table. The board is tilting dangerously to the north. And the next move, the move that will shock the strategists and break the models, will not come from the north. It will come from the south.